GM everyone, it's always GM somewhere in the world. Thank you to OpenBuild for hosting this workshop. So let's get started. So on this session, we are going to be covering about building frontend on StartNet. Before all, in this QR code, you will be able to access all the slides that we are going to be talking about today. About the workshop, we are going to be talking about some data that we previously know, and we are just going to refresh it to then talk about front-end libraries and do a live coding session. At the end, we're going to be sharing some resources. I'm Nestor Bonilla, and you can find me on X or Farcaster as UXNestor. At the bottom of the screen, you will be able to access the GitHub repo. On this one, you will see all the branches and all the code that we are going to be covering today. But before, let's talk about or remember a little bit about the compilation process. On the right side, you can see the 3 different steps of the Kiter compilation process. First, we will have our Kiter smart contract, and then that's going to be compiled to the Sierra, and finally, it's going to go to the Chasm or Kiter assembly. But when we are compiling our smart contract, we will have a contract class. This contract class will contain 3 different things. First, our code, then our ABI, and finally, our class hash. Why do I mention this? It's because when we create an instance of that smart contract, we will have an address, right? Do you remember when we compiled and created our first smart contract, probably last week? So with that address, you need to have also the ABI in order to merge those two and communicate with the blockchain through one of the libraries that we are going to be using today. So that was a refreshment to then go and talk about libraries. From left to right, we can see StartNet Rust, for example, if you want to build your front-end application just using Rust. Of course, you will need to handle WASM files, binaries, and so on and so forth. And then on the middle, we have StartNet Py. Let's say that you want to build your front-end application just using Python. You can use StartNet Py for that. And then on the right side, you have StartNet.js, which is the approach from JavaScript. StartNet.js will be kind of similar to Ether.js from Ethereum, right? Then you will have at the bottom StartNet React and StartNet Kit. So these are 2 different projects that have been built on top of StartNet.js. And you might ask, why do they build another set of libraries instead of just using StartNet.js? So that's a good question, and let me answer through an example. Let's say that you want to create one React application to communicate with the StartNet blockchain, and you start using StartNet.js. At some point, probably you will need to create a hook in order to get a balance every block or every 2 blocks, or information like that, like communicate with the blockchain and get the block numbers, things like that. And then you will create that hook for that project. For the next project, you probably will find something similar, and then you will need to create or reproduce that same example every project. So these folks from StartNet React created a set of hooks in order to speed up your development process. So yeah, and with that, we are ready to code. So for that, let's move to the GitHub repo. Let me close this. Here's the repo. It's called StartNet Workshop Frontend. Here you will have a very self-explanatory README file where you will follow all the steps in order to set up this project on your local. Then also you can find different branches that will go step by step on all the things that we are going to be talking about today. So just go copy the URL, then go to your terminal and do something like git clone the URL. That's gonna clone the repo, and I already have it here. And this is no more than one StartNet Foundry project where we have one smart contract with 2 functions, increase balance and get balance. But we are not gonna be covering smart contract on this one. Let's move now and create our front-end project. For that, let me go to the URL startnetreact.com. First step, let's create our project. So in the website, we can see on getting started that we have an option to use the CLI to create such application. Let's use it. We can use npm init or pnpm or yarn. Let's use npm for this one. So let's go to our project, and on the root, let's run npm init startnet. Then we will be asked, what is the name of the project that you want to build? Let's say Frontend. Next step, it's about the framework. In this one, we're gonna be using Next.js, but also we have Vite. This, it's gonna install all the dependencies that are required for the project. Once that's done, we can go to the front end, and then I'm gonna update some libraries that are not updated still in the packages JSON. So we're gonna be running this. Also, we are gonna be installing Tailwind Forms, and we're gonna use that on the last step. So the only thing that we need to do now is to plug Tailwind Forms, and for that we can go to the front end and then Tailwind config, and then on the plugins we need just to say that we require Tailwind Forms. Okay, let's run the project. Let's go to Startnet React and then localhost 3000. And this is the application by default. We have the selection of our wallets, and then we have a default text. Let's start by updating a little bit our first page. Let's go to page, and let me simplify this. So basically here we just have a page that is called Frontend Workshop, and then we are having a wallet bar. So let me explain a little bit on what wallet bar is. This is the default component that comes in the application. So we can see that wallet bar comes from components/wallet bar. Let's go to components and see what wallet bar contains. And this is basically a component that use account, use connect, and use disconnect from Startnet React. So let's start from the get-go. Layout TSX. Layout TSX will be the root layout for all our application. Here we will find a component that is called Startnet Provider. And we are importing Startnet Provider from components Startnet Provider. Let's go there. And here we will find that we are configuring this provider. And how can we do that? We are basically wrapping all the application with some parameters. We have an Startnet config component, and we are passing to it values like chain, provider, connector, explorer. Let me go one by one. First, chains. It comes with mainnet, but on this example, we are gonna be working with Sepolia instead. If you're gonna be working on mainnet, so you can change it to mainnet. So we're gonna be changing that. If you see, we need to pass array to this, because you can set different chains like Sepolia and then also mainnet. Then now let's move to providers. So right now we are using public provider, but you can also use other providers like Alchemy, for example. You can say, hey, I want to work with Alchemy provider, or I want to work with Lava provider. Of course, you will need just to pass the API key, and that it's gonna return an object, and then that is the object that you need to pass here on provider. Next step is connectors. We see connectors, it's coming from user injected connectors. So basically we are getting the connectors that are connected to our application. And in this case, we are using two, Argent and Bravos. Let's say that you want to create your own custom wallet. So you will need to say something like custom wallet here, but of course you will need to have your own implementation, right? In this case, we are not gonna be using custom wallets. We are just gonna be using Argent and Bravos. Now, next step here is include recommended only if not connector. Here is the explanation, basically. on this, and then also an order. So in the order right now is random, so that means that the order of Argent and Bravos will vary depending on randomness. If not, you have also another option, which is, I think it's alphabetical. Yeah, exactly, alphabetical. So we have the connectors here. And then finally, we have the explorer. So you know that in XStarnet, there are a couple of explorers. Let's say, you know, Voyager is okay, or no, I do want to work with Start Scan, for example, and that's good. You just need to import it from StarNet React /core and then change it here. That's it. That's basically the configuration that you need to pass to StarNet config. And then on the layout, we are wrapping the whole application with that StarNet provider. And that will allow us to go to our page, which is the first and only page that we are going to be using on this workshop, and say, okay, on this page, I want to import a wallet bar component that comes from the component. And here we will be using our first 3 hooks from StarNet React. So before explaining this, let's go to the documentation. We're gonna go a lot to the documentation of StarNet React website. So here on the left side, we can see all the hooks that are ready for us to use. So we can see on account, we have 3. We have use account, use connect, and use disconnect. So those are the ones that we are using in the default component that comes by default in the StarNet React application. So let's explain a little bit about it. Here we are getting the address from use account. We are getting disconnect object from use disconnect. We have a shortened address function. So with this one, let's say that instead of passing or showing all the address, we are just slicing and taking some initial characters and then some final characters of the whole addresses. And then we have the connect wallet that will return choose a wallet. We can see here, choose a wallet. And then we will have 2 buttons. Why 2 buttons? Because those are the connectors that we are receiving on use connect. And that is connected to StarNet provider, where we are passing these 2 connectors, right? Then we are gonna do a map through it, and then per each connector, we are gonna create a button that will have a key ID. We will be calling a connect, and we will be calling connect, and we're gonna be passing that connector. And finally, we will have as a text the ID, and that ID is Argent X and Bravos. I hope this is clear right now. This is the connect wallet component. And that's pretty much the only thing that we have here. So if you achieve this, we are ready on branch 0. Next step. Now let's read some data from the blockchain. Let's say that you have a minting process for either your ERC20 or your NFT project. And then of course you might think, I'm gonna have a function in that smart contract that will have a is minting open or is minting available, and then on your website you are gonna be poking that function over and over, like is minting available? No. Is minting available? No. And at some point it's gonna say yes, and then based on that you are gonna render some particular front-end stuff, right? That's one avenue, but you also have another avenue. Let's say that you know for sure that your minting process will start at block 10,000. So why don't you just get that block number from the blockchain, and then based on that, you will render some particular stuff. So because of that, let's do one example. So first, let's put some snippet code. This is no more than a box where we're gonna be reading the blockchain, we are gonna set the block number, and we want to know if we are live on this workshop or no. Let's see first how it will render. read the blockchain, current block number, and are we alive? What will be the first step? First step, let's go to the documentation. Let's go to StarkNet React, and then let's see on the query use hooks, which is one that makes sense. First, let's see use blocks. Let's see how can we use this. Now check on the return. Probably use block will return the block data, and we don't want that right now. I just want to get the block number, so probably use block number makes more sense. Let's go here, and we see that this hook fetch the latest or pending block number. This hook is useful to trigger a refresh on a new block. Cool. We want to use this. Now, how can we use this? They mentioned just the import from StarkNet React and also import block number from StarkNet. And then we are going to be using this. I see one error because in the hook they are referring to use block number and here is use block. So probably it should be use block number. Okay, so first let's import these two into our application. Let's go to the top and say use block number instead of use block and block number. Cool. Now what else? Let's see now that we want to use block number and we're gonna have two results. Data is loading and is error. We're gonna set this here. Let's say step number 1. Then we're gonna have data is loading and is error. This is perfectly okay if you are going to be using just one or two hooks, but in the moment that you are going to be using more than that, probably you will have some issues because if data is the object returned by two or more hooks, at some moment React is going to say, hey, you know, what data are you referring to? Are you referring to the data returned by use block number, or are you referring to this other hook data, right? Because of that, you can solve it by just doing a renaming. So for example, if it's data from use block number, so we can say something like block data. If it's is loading, maybe block is loading. If it's error, block is error. Now we have the data. How can we put that into the block number? Okay, let's just render it. Let's see how that plays out. Here we see that this is a number, but how can we verify that this is really the block number? So for that, let's say that I want to go to one of the two explorers. Let's use Voyager. We can go to Voyager Online, then we select their network because we set that on the StarkNet provider, we want to work with Sepolia. They are returning the block number from Sepolia, right? And then we can go to blocks. In blocks, we will see a number and let's verify. All right, it seems that's the block. So we are getting already the block number. Now, let's say that we want to know if we are live or not in this workshop and modify the front end based on that. So for that, we should have a previous data, something like our minting process is going to end by block 11,000, for example. So we will need a new variable. And for that, we can say something like workshop ends. Let's say that we want this workshop to end in 1 hour. So we can do the calculation. Right now we are around block 73490 and say, you know, based on this, every block is being mined around 6 minutes. So we can take our calculator and say something like there are 60 minutes in an hour, so divided that by 6, it's going to be 10, so around 10 blocks per hour, and we want to finish this workshop in 1 hour. So we're just going to say We're just gonna take this number and say workshop ends at 500. That's where the workshop ends, right? So we can do something like if block data is less than workshop ends, then we're gonna be rendering something like workshop is live. If not, workshop has ended. So with that, we are good. We just need to confirm that indeed we are gonna be receiving this data from the hook. So now let's try that out. Let's go here, and yeah, we are live in this workshop. Surprise. Then the last one is, what if we want to modify the color of this box, for example? Something like we want to change the color for a green background. So we can do that. Let's change this background and say something like if block data is again less than workshop ends, we are gonna be placing a green background, if not a red one. So let's try that out. Probably there's something wrong. Yeah, the symbol here and then the symbol here. Cool. Now, yes, now we have modified the UX. We have put a green background and we are saying the workshop is live. So that's our first use of these hooks. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. Now let's say, what if you want to know your balance on the wallet that is connected to the application? So let's say right now we can connect through Davos, but it's just that right now we don't know what is the balance of it, right? Either in Ethereum or Starnet. So let's do that. For that, let's go with another snippet code. Let's go to our application and let's move now to place this snippet code. This is what we have. Read your balance, then we want to place a symbol ticker and a balance. Sure. So first thing is like, how can we get the balance of the wallet that is being connected, right? Let's do that. Let's go again to the documentation. Here in the hooks, we can go and look for something related with balance. So we see in query, we have the first one. The first one is about use balance. Let's click here and we will need to use account. We are gonna get an address and then we're gonna get the balance out of it. Probably if you remember, we already have use account because we are using that in the wallet connect. But we're gonna be using that here too. First step, let's go to our application and then import those hooks. Then second step, it's about get the address that is connected and then get the balance of that address. Let's add something like step number 2. Cool. Now we will have an address, is loading, is error, and data. Following our previous examples, let's be very clear. For example, in this result, address, we're going to be working with a smart contract. So that's also going to be an address. And I want to be crystal clear. So let's say user address. Then it's loading. Let's rename it to balance is loading, balance is error, and balance error, and balance data. Cool. And now you see an error in address. Why? Because there is no such address right now because it's called use address. But then if we rename it, it's gonna still say what is use address. And that's because that's not the parameter it is waiting. It is waiting address. So we need to say, okay, now address is gonna be user address. Okay, now we are having the result, but we are not showing it. So let's go and show it. So let's use the balance data. That's the data that we are getting. And then we are gonna placing this in the ticker. So let's use balance data. And if we have that response, we are gonna get the symbol. Here, we can see that we will have decimals, formatted symbols, and value. Let's put the symbol. Let's go to the website and there's nothing here. Why? Because this is connected to the account that is connected to the application. And right now we have not connected anything. But if we connect our Bravos application, let's say we are gonna be getting a symbol. Now, why do we get ETH? So let's go here and read more on the token. You can pass a parameter token here, something like token here, and then you will have to pass here the token that you want the balance for, right? But if there's no address passed here in the documentation, they mention default to the native token, and the native token is Ethereum. That's why you see here Ethereum. Now let's place the balance. Let's go back and say, okay, what it's gonna be the return data. We are gonna be getting a decimal, which is a number, but also we're gonna be having a formatted, a string. So let's show the formatted, and I'm gonna explain more about it. Let's go to the balance. Let's go to balance data. Then let's go to formatted. Let's see. We have our balance pretty much. Let's just verify. It's, yeah, pretty much correct. 0.024 so on. So, okay, there's something to mention here. If you have explored with Ether.js before, you might know that you will get a data or a value, and then that number you need to calculate it into formatted in a better way with the right decimals. But in this case, it's very straightforward that you just need to get the formatted value, and it's going to be a string, and it's going to be the balance. So just to mention about it. So probably you don't want to show that long number. Because of that, we are just going to say we just want to have the last 4 decimals, and we have the balance here. Okay, cool. Now, one thing that will be better is that instead of, for example, when we disconnect, right now we are seeing no value on symbols and a number on balance. And I don't think you want that. So probably we should have a condition and say, if there's a wallet connected, then I want to show this box. If not, don't show it. So let's end with that. How can we do that? Let's just wrap this box by saying something like, if balance is not loading and balance has no error, then let's render this. What the box? Let's see. Cool. Right now we see there's no box, but once we connect the wallet, we have the box. Next step. Now let's read data from our smart contract that we previously deployed. For that, let's go to the code and let's place again some snippet code. This is what I want to show. Something like read your contract, then get the balance and have a button in order to refresh such balance. Easy. In order to read and connect to a smart contract, we need to have a couple of things. We need to have, as I previously mentioned, one address and also one ABI. So first, let's go with the address. Let's go and minimize this portion. Let's add some comments. Step number 3, create a variable, contract address. And this is gonna be this address. Just to verify, let's go to Voyager, let's go to Sepolia, and let's look for that address. This contract has been already deployed, and we have called a few times this contract, and we are gonna get the ABI now. So we have 2 ways. First, if you are deploying your own smart contract, so basically you will have a contract class, and in that contract class you will have the ABI. Let me show to you. Here you should have one folder called target, and then in target another called dev, and then in that one you will have the contract class. In that contract class you should have your ABI. If that's not the case and you are just following the workshop, you can go to that address and then you can go to code tab and just copy this ABI here. So let's do that. Let's go to source and then create a new folder, and that's going to be ABIs, and then in ABIs create a new file called abi.json. Here you just need to paste the ABI. And just to understand a little bit more, the ABI, you will have the two functions that we explained at the beginning. And one is going to be increase balance with one parameter, and that's going to be amount, and the other one will be get balance with no inputs and one output. Okay, so we have the contract address, and then we're gonna import contract ABI from ABIs abi.json. With that, we have the address and the ABI. Now let's go again where to the documentation to see how can we read data. We go to the hooks, then we go to query, and we have one hook that is just for that, just to read contract data. Here we will see that we need to use new hooks. We already are using use accounts, but we are not using use contract read. So let's import that. And then we have already the address, we have already the ABI, we have the address, which in this case is the user address. So we just need to use hook, and this is how we're gonna use it. Let's go to our third step. And again, we need to do the renaming. So let's go with read data, read is error, read is loading, and read error. We are ready to go. Then we need to pass the parameters, which are function name arguments. Those are going to be the primaries. So which is the function name? If we go back to the ABI, it's going to be get balance. So this is going to be the function. It has no arguments. The ABI, it's going to be called contract ABI, and then the address is going to be called contract address. Cool. And this watch means that if we set that true, it's going to refresh data at every block. Sometimes it doesn't refresh every block, and that's why I am setting one button just to refresh it. Now let's go and use the read data. Let's go to the balance, and instead of XYZ, we're gonna set read data dot toString. Let's see how that plays out. And we have a huge balance, right? So probably some folks have used this contract before in other workshops. So what I did is just deploy a new instance of that contract. So let me do that again. So first, you just need to declare that smart contract. And if there is already a declaration with that same code, it's gonna fail. Right now, we see a failure because it's mentioning that this contract has already been declared with this hash. So with that hash, we are gonna be deploying a new instance. So let's get that contract address and let's look for it. We see this is a new contract. We see the code, for example. We can copy that code and we can go to the ABI. It should be the same code. It should be the same ABI. And with that, we can just replace this contract address here and let's run it. We are running already the application. So right now we see no balance, but let's say that we want to interact with the contract here. Let's first verify that if we read it, it's gonna be 0. If we query, it's 0. But if we go to write contract and then we connect our Bravos wallet, then let's say we want to modify by 1 the value. We click on transact, we click on sign, and this is gonna give us a hash transaction. Let's go back to the contract and then go to read, click again on query, and now it should be 1. If we go back to our application, then we see the balance is 1. So that's pretty much it. Now, if we go to our code, The last portion that I would like to mention is refetch. Let's say that by some reason, the hook is not being updated every block, but you want to have a button just to click and being able to refresh. So for that, we can use refetch. We can say read refetch, and we can use this into that button. How? We just need to say every time that I'm gonna click on refresh button, I'm gonna be calling read refetch. And with that, we're done with this portion. And the last step will be how to write or change the status of smart contract. So for that, let me first do a couple of things. So we already have the address, we already have the API, but we don't know yet the hooks that we need to interact with in order to change the status of that smart contract. For that, what are we going to be doing? We are going to be going to the documentation. Let's go to StartNet React, and then we will look into the hooks, but now we are not going to be looking into query, because we are not going to be querying. We are going to be looking on mutation. So there are two, use contract write and use sign type data. Let's use the first one, use contract write. Hook to send one or more transaction to StartNet. Cool. That's pretty much what we need. We need to have the hook. In this case, we're going to be using use contract write. Let's import that, use contract write. Then also we need to get the contract. For that, we can go to and create step number 4. We will be using use contract. We are not importing that yet. Use contract. Let's go back. Here we need to pass the API. We know that the API is going to be contract API, and then the address is going to be contract address. Then we have the contract. With that, we need to set the calls. Then for the calls, we are going to be using use memo. So let's import that from React. Import use state. We also are going to be using use state and use memo from React. In this one, we're going to be populating the transactions, and then we will say if there is no user address, or if there is no contract, then we're going to return an empty array. Otherwise, we are going to be populating transaction, and we are going to be calling one transaction. Which one? Let's go to the API and let's see the name of the transaction. This will be increase balance, which require one input of amount, that is U256. Let's set the name of the function, and then it's gonna be just one value, so it's gonna be amount. But we have not defined amount, so let's do that. Let's go here, and then let's use let amount, set amount, and it's gonna be a use state, and it's gonna have a default value of 0. So in this case, we could say something like, if there is an amount, then set that amount. If not, pass 0. And finally, we are going to be calling use memo every time that the contract change or the user address change, which means every time we connect a new wallet, for example, or if the amount change. And the last one is very important. Why? Because imagine that you are rendering your page and then you just click send. At that moment, it's going to be 0, right? But what if you modify that input with a number of 10? At that moment, because there is no amount here, basically, it's going to be passing a 0 value again. So you don't want that. You want every time that the amount value change to redo the calls. And that's it. Finally, we just need to use this portion in order to have that function that you need to call to write async. And what you will be getting is data and spending. Again, we can rename this with something like write data. and is pending with something like write is pending. With that, we are ready to call async. Now, let's see the UX portion. So let's place the snippet code for this last section. Let's go at the bottom and let's place this. Of course, we see an error, handle submit. So we need a function just to handle this portion. So let's go to step number 4, and to conclude, let's set this function. This is gonna be a function called handle submit. This is just React. This is nothing related to how we use the hooks for StartNet. At the end, we will have the amount, and here is where we are gonna place the logic. Which logic? Well, we just need to say await write async. With this, we are gonna be calling handle submit every time that you change the value of the input here of type number here in the form. And every time you change that value, it's gonna be set it again with set amount. And then when you click on the submit, because it is a type submit, then it's gonna go to the onSubmit function of the form, and it's gonna be calling handle submit. Then this value is gonna be coming to this function, and here we just preventing the default behavior, and finally calling the write async. So I think we are ready to give it a try. Let's go. And now let's see that we want to modify by a value of 2. If we click send, we will see an error. Why is that happening? Let's see the error. It says account is required. So what is happening here? If we click on close, and we see here, there's no account connected right now. And we are calling write contract, but every time that we want to change the status of a smart contract, we need to sign that transaction. And for that, we need to have an address. Because of that, right now, there is no wallet connected. So that's not gonna work. But if we click on Bravos and we go to, number 2 as the amount to send, and then we click send, then we will have the pop-up. If we click on sign, then that's gonna send the value into that smart contract. So that's pretty much it. Now, if we go, for example, to that address on Voyager, so we should have a transaction that is pending, but for example, if we go to read contract, we will see that the value now is 3, because 1 plus 2, 3, we are okay. Then what else do we need? Let's see now. For example, right now we had to go to Voyager in order to look for the data that has been changed. But what if we want to know a receipt, basically like this link that we are having at the bottom? Instead of a link, I want to set a transaction hash. So let's do that. Let's go back to StartNet React, and there is another hook for that. That is called use explorer. So with that, we can just pass a hash, and then we will have a full link. Let's use explorer then. Let's import use explorer. And how can we use this? Let's create an instance of explorer on step number 4. We have it here. And finally, we are gonna have an hyperlink. Let's go to the bottom. Let's see here. Instead of this link, what I do want to show is something like explorer block and the hash, and where am I gonna get the hash? And we are not gonna be looking on the block. I want to use transaction. And then we will need to pass something like the hash. And where are we gonna get the hash? That's probably gonna come from write data. And then here we will have a transaction hash. So that's what we want. Instead of this value, we want that one. And that's pretty much what we want. But we probably don't want to show that link if there is no such transaction. Because of that, we can do something like, if there is a write data that has some transaction hash, then I do want to show this. If not, I do not. Let's go here and let's place this here, this here. And now every time that we will have a transaction hash, we are gonna show a link. But I also want to address the issue of sending a transaction without an account connected. And for that, we can go to the button and say, this is gonna be disabled if there is no such user address, for example. Let's just modify this. So let's give it a try. Now, if we, for example, don't have any account connected, every time we click, that's not gonna pass through. But let's see that the UX is not self-explanatory right now. So I want to modify the style of this button. For that, I can do something like, if there is an user address connected, then let's use this background. If not, then use something like background white. Let's see. Okay, cool. What else can we do? So right now, let's say we are in number 3, right? Let's say that we want to modify that by 5, and then we cannot click here, but let's connect our Bravos account. We should be able to send this value, and now it should be around 10, and then we will see this transaction. But let's say that we want to go one step ahead and show some better UX, something like every time the user click on send, then it's gonna have an icon loading, and then once that transaction is settled on the layer, then we're gonna change the status, something like that. We can do that, and we can explore another hook for that. So let's go to the documentation and let's go for use wait for transaction. So we're gonna be using use wait for transaction for exactly that. Let's import that here, and then what we will have is something like, on step number 4, we will have something like this. Let's see. Is loading, is error, error and data, use wait for transaction, and we need to pass the hash. So we already have the hash. Where? On write data. In write data, we will have the transaction hash. And then we will have is loading. We can rename it something like wait is loading, wait is error, wait error, and wait data. Done. Then let's say now we want to have one icon animation. There are many ways to do this, but let's say that I want to show you a very easy approach. I don't want to install any additional library for this, so just use this animation. It's an SVG animation that is on just one function. It's called loading state. Let's use loading state on this function that is going to be called button connect. So what are we going to be doing here? We're going to be calling loading state, and we are going to be passing just different messages, and we are going to be saying when this is going to be animated or no. So if the write is pending, we're going to be saying send. If the wait is loading, we are going to be saying waiting for confirmation. And if there's a wait data and that data status is rejected, so we're going to say the transaction has been rejected. Why that could happen? Let's say that you are sending a parameter that is not approved for the smart contract. That could reject the transaction, or any other case. And then finally, if there is such wait data and it is not status of rejected, then we will say the transaction is confirmed. So where are we going to be using this? We are going to be replacing this by the text send. With that, we are ready to give it a try, and let's try our final application. Right now, I cannot modify this because I cannot send a transaction. Let's say now we want to connect to our browse account. Then we want to update this value by, let's say, 5, and then click on send. What's happening right now is that if you see, I have not approved any transaction, and right now we have that status of send. Then if we click on sign, look at the button, and it will say waiting for confirmation. Once that's done, it's going to change the text and it's going to be show another one, transaction confirmed. With that, we are able to click on check transaction on Explorer, and then boom, this is the transaction that we just made. Ready, this is the full application we built today. We went through reading data from the blockchain, like the block number. We went through reading the balance of an account, like getting the balance on ETH, for example. We also went to reading data from the contract to conclude on writing data to a smart contract. So basically, that will be all, and I hope you really enjoyed this workshop, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.